The Amazon River moves like something alive, not like water, like a creature, something ancient and breathing, and aware of everything that enters it. It stretches across 9 countries, drains an area nearly the size of the continental United States, and carries more fresh water than any other river system on the planet. And somewhere inside all of that moving, murky, warm brown water, something is waiting. If you have ever stood at the edge of the Amazon basin and looked down into the shallows, you already know the feeling, that particular stillness that comes over you, that instinct honed over millions of years of human evolution, telling you very clearly and very simply that you are not the apex predator here. You are the visitor, and visitors in the Amazon need to understand the rules quickly. This channel is dedicated to survival stories from the wildest places on Earth, and if you want more of what you are about to hear, the subscribe button is right there. Hit it now before we get into this, because what happened in this stretch of the Peruvian Amazon is the kind of story that changes the way you think about wild places forever. Her name was Claudia. She was 26 years old, a marine biology student from Lisbon, Portugal, who had come to the Amazon on a research internship. She had been in the region for 11 days before the incident, 11 days of early morning boat rides, afternoon transect surveys along the riverbanks, evenings cataloging specimens, mosquito nets and headlamps, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from working in humidity so thick it feels solid. She was not a tourist. She was educated, trained, and careful, and none of that stopped what happened from happening. The guide's name was Emilio. He was 53 years old, born in a small riverside community, 2 hours by boat, upstream from the nearest town of any size. He had been navigating this particular stretch of the river since he was old enough to hold a paddle. His father had worked these waters, his grandfather had fished them. He carried the knowledge of this place in his body, the way other people carry language. Instinctively, without thinking about it. Just there, always available, woven into every movement and every decision. And on the morning of the incident, it was Emilio who saw what Claudia did not see before she fell. To understand what happened in that water, you need to understand the animal. Because the piranha is one of the most spectacularly misunderstood creatures on Earth, and that misunderstanding cuts both ways. Popular culture has made the piranha into a monster. Hollywood gave it a mythology far beyond its actual behavior. And in correcting that mythology, some people have swung too far in the other direction, dismissing the piranha as essentially harmless, a small fish with an exaggerated reputation. Neither of those positions is accurate, and neither of them would have helped Claudia in the water that morning. The piranha belongs to the family Serrasalmidae. There are between 60 and 80 species, depending on the classification system being used, and they range across the freshwater systems of South America, from the Orinoco to the Piranha, with their greatest diversity in the Amazon basin. Most piranha species are not the frenzy-inducing predators of popular imagination. Many are primarily omnivores. Some eat mostly seeds and plant material. The vegetarian piranha, Colossoma macropomum, which the locals call tambaqui, can grow to over 30 kilograms and feeds almost entirely on fruits and nuts that fall from riverside trees during flood season. But there are species that warrant serious attention. The red-bellied piranha, Pygocentris naturari, is the one most people picture. Reddish or orange on the belly, silver-gray on the flanks, with a jaw structure that produces one of the most powerful bites of any freshwater fish relative to body size. Their teeth interlock precisely, like the blades of scissors, and they are continuously replaced throughout the fish's life. When one tooth is lost, another grows immediately behind it. They are always sharp. They are always ready. The red-bellied piranha operates primarily as a highly efficient scavenger, an ecosystem cleaner of extraordinary effectiveness. Dead and dying animals, wounded fish, carcasses that fall into the water are processed with remarkable speed. In the dry season, when water levels drop and fish become concentrated in shrinking pools, piranha aggregations can become dense, competition for food intensifies, and behavior shifts. This is when the risk profile changes. This is when the animal becomes something that deserves genuine caution. And Claudia fell into the water during the dry season. The research team had been working on a narrow floating platform, a crude wooden structure tethered to the bank by rope and stabilized with oil drums lashed underneath. It was the kind of improvised field equipment that characterizes genuine Amazon research. Nothing elegant, everything functional. They were collecting water samples at depth, using weighted collection bottles on long cables that had to be managed carefully because the current pulled at them constantly. Emilio was at the back of the platform, checking the anchor rope, when he heard the sound. Not a shout, not a scream. Just a short, sharp gasp, and then the particular hollow slap of a person hitting water from a low height. He turned instantly. The platform was empty where Claudia had been standing. The cable she had been managing trailed from the edge into the water, still moving. Emilio did not jump in after her. This is the detail that matters most. This is the decision that saved her life. And understanding why he made that decision requires understanding something that most visitors to the Amazon never learn, because nobody teaches it to them before they get there. Emilio had grown up beside this river. He had been told from early childhood, and had then confirmed through decades of direct observation, that the worst thing a rescuer can do when someone falls into piranha-rich water is to enter the water in the same location in the same manner. Two people thrashing and bleeding in the water is not better than one. It is exponentially worse. He grabbed the cable first, the research cable that was still trailing from Claudia's hand into the current. He grabbed it and pulled, and for a moment it held resistance, which told him she was still connected to it, still conscious enough to be holding on. He braced his feet against the edge of the platform and hauled. Claudia had gone under for approximately 4 seconds. When she surfaced, she was 3 meters downstream from the platform, moving with the current, one hand still gripping the collection cable, the other arm windmilling against the pull of her pack, which she had not removed before the fall. Emilio was pulling the cable toward him with both hands, walking backward along the platform. He was not shouting. He was not panicking. He was just pulling, steadily, with his full weight behind it. The other 2 members of the research team had been in the adjacent inflatable boat, 10 meters further downstream along the bank. They heard the fall and began paddling immediately, but they were working against the current and losing ground. The piranha were already there. They had been there before Claudia entered the water. In this stretch of the river, at this time of year, with water levels at their seasonal low, piranha aggregations were dense along the shaded bank margins where the platform was moored. The drop in water volume concentrated both the piranha and their prey, and the vibrations of the platform above had likely been attracting them for hours. The sudden entry of a large object from above, the displacement of water, the thrashing, these were signals. Ancient signals that have been written into piranha neurology for tens of millions of years. Claudia felt the first bite within the first 30 seconds. She described it later as a feeling she had no reference point for. Not pain initially, more like a very hard pinch, precise and brief, over the outside of her left calf. Then another, on the back of her left ankle. She understood immediately what was happening, and her understanding of it, her ability to register the situation analytically rather than surrendering entirely to panic, was almost certainly also a factor in her survival. She did not thrash harder. She did not scream. She kept her grip on the cable and she kicked with her right leg, a single hard kick forward into the water, to try to reorient herself toward the platform. Emilio had pulled her to within 6 meters of the platform when the cable went slack. The clip at the collection bottle end had released. He had about 3 seconds to process this before the cable came fully loose and Claudia began drifting again. He made the next decision in essentially no time at all, because he had made it before. Not in this exact scenario, but in the countless smaller rehearsals of judgment that accumulate over a lifetime of working beside dangerous water. He grabbed the secondary rope from the anchor at the corner of the platform, a rope that was 12 meters long and had a loop at the end for exactly this purpose, and he threw it. He was not an expert rope thrower. Nobody is, under real pressure, with wet hands, throwing over water with a current. The first throw fell short by 2 meters. He pulled it back in and threw again. Claudia caught the second throw. She looped the rope under her arms across her chest, the way people are taught in open water safety courses, and Emilio began pulling again. The inflatable boat reached her when she was 4 meters from the platform. One of the researchers grabbed her under the arms from the side of the boat, while Emilio maintained tension on the rope to prevent the current from taking her. They lifted her from the water in a single motion. She had been in the water for approximately 90 seconds. Now comes the part of this story that most accounts of piranha attacks handle badly, either by minimizing what happened to generate a reassuring narrative, or by sensationalizing it beyond recognition. The reality falls between those extremes, and is interesting enough without embellishment. Claudia had received 7 bites, 7 distinct wounds, all on her left leg, distributed from mid-calf to the heel. The wounds were precise, clean-edged, each one roughly semicircular, between 1 and 2 centimeters across, and deep. The deepest penetrated to the periosteum, the membrane surrounding the bone, at the back of her ankle. 2 of the wounds had removed tissue entirely. Not torn it, removed it. The cutting mechanism of a piranha's interlocking teeth is genuinely that efficient. She had lost blood. Not a catastrophic amount, but enough that she was pale by the time they got her onto the platform. Enough that her hands were shaking, and her voice when she finally spoke was smaller than her normal voice. She was in shock, which is itself a physiological danger separate from blood loss, and she was in pain that was arriving now in full after the initial adrenaline had started to subside. Emilio had a first aid kit in his pack. Every guide working these waters carries one, and every guide who has worked these waters long enough carries one that is considerably more comprehensive than the basic versions sold in outdoor recreation stores. His kit included compression bandages, antiseptic irrigation solution, a hemostatic dressing, an antihistamine injection for allergic reactions, and a basic oral antibiotic course. He had used all of these items before, not in combination, and not on wounds quite like these, but he knew what each item was for, and he worked through the immediate treatment with the same steady focus he had brought to the rope throwing. He irrigated each wound thoroughly. He applied the hemostatic dressing to the 2 deepest wounds and held direct pressure, while one of the other researchers held Claudia's hand and talked to her about things of no consequence, about the weather back in Lisbon, about the project schedule, about anything that kept her voice moving and her attention somewhere other than her leg. Emilio wrapped the compression bandage from the foot upward in overlapping layers. He kept her leg elevated on his pack while the second researcher started the outboard motor on the inflatable. They were 2 hours from a town with a medical clinic. In normal conditions on this river, in this season, with the water level low and the sandbars where the deep channel used to run, it was actually closer to 2.5 hours. Emilio sat in the bow of the inflatable with Claudia's leg across his lap, maintaining elevation, and watching the bandaging for signs of saturation. She asked him once if she was going to be all right. He told her yes, and he said it in a way that was not reassurance for the sake of reassurance, but an actual assessment, a calm delivery of what he genuinely believed, based on what he had seen. She arrived at the clinic in good condition, alert, stable, insignificant pain, but physiologically sound. The clinic doctor, who had seen piranha wounds before, assessed the damage and arranged transfer to the regional hospital, where a surgeon cleaned and debrided the wounds under local anesthesia. 3 of the 7 wounds required sutures. The deepest ankle wound was monitored for bone infection over the following weeks. She received a course of intravenous antibiotics as a precaution, given the bacterial environment of the river water. She was back in the field, on modified duties, within 3 weeks. She still has the scars. She describes them in interviews she has given since, with a kind of matter-of-fact appreciation, the way people sometimes describe near-miss accidents after enough time has passed to allow perspective to replace terror. And when she is asked what saved her, she does not hesitate. She says Emilio. She says it simply and completely, as though no other answer is possible or would be honest. But Emilio, when he was asked the same question, gave a more complicated answer. He said knowledge saved her. Not him specifically, the knowledge of the river, the knowledge of the animal. He said that people who come to the Amazon with fear of the piranha, or with dismissal of the piranha, are both equally unprepared, because both responses replace actual understanding with an emotional posture that does not serve survival. The piranha, he said, is not a monster and it is not harmless. It is an animal with specific behaviors driven by specific conditions, and if you know those conditions, you can navigate them. If you do not know them, you are simply hoping the conditions will be in your favor that day. He is right, and the conditions that morning were not in Claudia's favor. The dry season on the Amazon is a phenomenon that reshapes the entire ecosystem. The river at peak flow during the wet season flood can be 40 meters deep in some channels and spreads across a floodplain that in some areas stretches hundreds of kilometers from the main channel. Fish have access to enormous volumes of habitat. They disperse into the forest, into temporary lakes, into flooded grasslands, hunting insects and fruits and smaller fish across an area so vast that encounters between any individual fish and any individual prey item are relatively infrequent. Then the rains stop. Gradually, over weeks and months, the water retreats. The floodplain drains back, the temporary lakes shrink, the forest floor reemerges, and the fish are driven back into the main channel, into the permanent lakes and deep pools, into smaller and smaller volumes of water that must support the same total biomass that had, during the flood, been spread across an enormous area. This is the crucible. This is when competition for resources intensifies to a level that has no equivalent during the wet season. This is when piranha schools, which during high water are relatively dispersed and relatively docile, consolidate into dense aggregations, and when feeding behavior becomes more aggressive simply because there is more competition and less food. Emilio had known this without knowing the scientific literature behind it. He had observed it over 50 years of living beside this river. He knew which months the piranha were dangerous, in the way he knew which months the rains would come, not from a calendar. From the river itself, from the color of the water, from the behavior of the birds on the bank, from the sounds at night, from 100 small signals that accumulate into a kind of knowing that cannot be easily transferred, but can, in moments like this one, be the difference between a person living and dying. He knew that the platform was moored in exactly the kind of location where piranha congregate in the dry season, shaded, calm water directly beside moving current, organic matter accumulating below from the platform surface and from the researchers' activities. He had been watching the water that morning, and he had seen the quick silver flashes just below the surface that told him the school was large and close. He had meant to mention it to the team before they began the sample collection. He had been distracted by the anchor rope issue. That moment of distraction was the one gap in an otherwise meticulous morning, and the gap was enough. He does not dwell on this. He has the disposition of someone who has lived through enough actual emergencies to understand that self-recrimination is a luxury with no practical value. What happened, happened. What matters is what you do next. The piranha is not the only thing in this water that requires knowledge rather than emotion. The Amazon basin is home to an ecosystem of complexity so profound that scientists with entire careers invested in its study routinely encounter species they cannot immediately identify. The diversity here is not just large, it is active. It is changing. New species are formally described from the Amazon basin every year. Some years, dozens of new species. Fish, insects, plants, fungi, amphibians, emerging from the biological density of this place into formal scientific recognition. The electric eel is not an eel. It is more closely related to the carp and the catfish than to any true eel. It can produce electrical discharges of up to 600 volts, used for hunting, navigation, and defense. An electric eel of significant size, encountered in shallow water, can produce a discharge strong enough to cause cardiac events in a human being. People in riverside communities know this. They know which time of year the eels move into the shallows to spawn. They know which areas of the bank to avoid wading in at night. They know this because someone before them knew it and transmitted the knowledge forward. The arapaima is one of the largest freshwater fish in the world. Adults regularly exceed 2 meters in length and can weigh over 200 kilograms. It is an air-breathing fish, which means it must surface periodically to breathe. And this behavior, this regular surfacing in shallow water, means that in some parts of the river, a person wading can find themselves beside a fish larger than themselves. The arapaima is not dangerous to humans in any meaningful way, but its size and sudden proximity can create the kind of surprise that leads to falls, and falls into this water, as Claudia discovered, are serious events. The bull shark is not confined to salt water. This is known to scientists and should be known to anyone working in or near these river systems. Bull sharks can survive and thrive in fresh water, and they have been documented thousands of kilometers up the Amazon from the Atlantic coast. They are among the most genuinely dangerous large animals on the planet, not because they are exclusively aggressive toward humans, but because they are opportunistic, they are large, they are fast, and they are present in environments where people do not expect large sharks to be present. The surprise is the danger. And the anaconda, the green anaconda, Eunectes marinus, is the heaviest snake in the world. Large adults can exceed 8 meters in length and weigh more than 200 kilograms. They are ambush predators, lurking in shallow water at the bank margin, waiting for mammals that come to drink. They are not venomous. They kill by constriction, wrapping around prey and tightening their coils with each exhalation of the prey animal until the cardiovascular system fails. An anaconda of significant size, in the water, is a predator capable of killing a human being. This has happened. Not frequently. Not as frequently as popular imagination suggests. But it has happened, and it has happened in exactly the kind of shallow, vegetation-tangled bank margin that researchers working from floating platforms spend their days beside. The point is not to generate fear. The point is the same point Emilio was making when he said, "Knowledge saved Claudia rather than heroism." Fear and dismissal are both forms of ignorance, knowledge is the only tool that actually works. In riverside communities throughout the Amazon basin, this knowledge is not academic. It is not learned from books or lectures or nature documentaries. It is experiential, embodied, transmitted through observation and practice across generations, in exactly the same way that Emilio's knowledge was transmitted to him from his father and his grandfather before that. It is the kind of knowledge that produces specific, practical behavior, which bank to fish from in which season, which month to avoid wading at the downstream end of a certain pool, how to read the surface disturbance that tells you a large animal has moved through the area recently, what the birds do before a weather change that will affect the current, how long you have before the water rises in a rain event. This knowledge base is under pressure. The communities that hold it are changing rapidly. Young people in riverside villages now often have smartphones. They have access to the same global information streams that everyone else has access to. In some ways, this is straightforwardly beneficial. In other ways, the pull toward a different kind of life, toward cities, toward work that does not require intimate daily engagement with the specific conditions of a specific stretch of river, means that the knowledge transmission chain is weakening. The specific granular expertise that Emilio holds is not being replaced at the same rate it is being lost. Researchers and conservation organizations working in the Amazon have begun to address this, not always smoothly, not always successfully, but with a genuine recognition that the loss of traditional ecological knowledge is a conservation problem with practical consequences. When the people who know how to live beside this river without being killed by it are gone, the people who replace them will be starting over. And starting over in the Amazon, as Claudia can confirm, has a steep learning curve. The piranha bites healed. The scars will be with her permanently, a set of small, precise marks on her left leg that record 90 seconds in the river. But something else came from that morning that will not leave her either. She has said in subsequent interviews that the experience reordered her understanding of what field research in this environment actually requires. She had come to the Amazon with excellent academic preparation, a thorough grounding in the biology of the systems she was studying, and a respect for the environment that she considered genuine and sufficient. What she did not have was the kind of knowing that Emilio had. She did not know the difference between a stretch of river that is relatively safe to work beside in the wet season and a stretch that is actively dangerous in the dry season, with water at this level, and piranha at this concentration, and a platform creating exactly this particular combination of shadow and warmth and vibration. She is now learning Portuguese beyond the level she arrived with. She is spending her research time not just in the water column and along the bank, but in the community upstream, learning the seasonal calendar of this stretch of river the way Emilio learned it, through accumulated time and observation and conversation with people who have been doing this for their entire lives. She describes this as the most valuable scientific education she has received. This is not sentimentalism about indigenous knowledge. It is not the romanticization of traditional life. It is a straightforward assessment of what information exists, where it resides, and what you lose if you fail to access it. The Amazon is not a static place. It is one of the most dynamic ecosystems on the planet. The river itself moves, not just in terms of current, but in terms of its actual course across the landscape. Meanders migrate laterally over time. Old channels are abandoned and filled. New channels cut through what was previously dry land. The river system is also responding, like every other river system on the planet, to changes in precipitation patterns driven by broader climatic shifts. The dry seasons are behaving differently than they did 20 years ago. The flood peaks are changing. The timing of fish migrations, the breeding cycles of aquatic species, the behavior of the piranha schools in the dry season concentration pools, all of this is shifting in response to pressures that have nothing to do with the Amazon basin itself. This means that the knowledge Emilio has is itself a moving target. Some of what he knows is stable: the fundamental ecology of the piranha, its tooth replacement cycle, its preference for shaded bank margins in low water, its response to blood and vibration. These are things coded deeply enough in the biology of the animal that they will not change quickly. But the timing of seasonal events, the specific locations along the bank where conditions for dangerous piranha aggregations will develop, these are details that require continuous recalibration. The river tells you, if you know how to read it. The question is whether people are still present who know how to read it, and whether that reading is being updated continuously as the river changes. Emilio reads the river every day he works on it. He is on the water before dawn most mornings, checking conditions, observing surface behavior, reading the light and the current, and the smell of the water, which changes with the season, and with upstream events in ways that he has learned to interpret. He is not doing this consciously, as a systematic survey. He is doing it the way a musician listens to an orchestra, with attention that has been trained over so long that it no longer requires effort. The information simply arrives and is processed and integrated into the ongoing assessment of conditions that runs continuously beneath everything else he does. It was this continuous background assessment that had flagged the Piranha school that morning before Claudia fell. He had seen the flashes. He had registered the significance. He had been moving to act on it when the anchor rope required attention. The gap was 30 seconds, perhaps less. And in those 30 seconds, the combination of a loose cable, an off-balance researcher, a platform that moved slightly under her weight, and the physics of a fall were enough. He does not describe the rescue itself in dramatic terms. He describes it in procedural terms. This happened, then I did this. Then this happened, then I did this. The drama was real, but the drama was not where his attention was. His attention was on the sequence of practical problems and the best available solution to each one. The rope, the cable, the pressure on the bandaging, the time to the clinic. These were not crisis responses. They were problems to be solved, and he solved them in order. This is a disposition that the most effective people in genuinely dangerous environments share across cultures and across types of expertise. Emergency medicine physicians in trauma centers describe the same quality. Test pilots describe it. People who have worked in high-risk environments long enough to be still working in them decades later almost universally describe a shift from emotional response to procedural response that happens under pressure, not because the emotion disappears, but because the emotion moves to a different place, somewhere that is not driving the hands. Emilio learned this disposition from his father and from the river itself. The river teaches it through experience, because the river does not adjust its behavior to your emotional state. The current does not slow because you are frightened. The piranha does not hesitate because you are unprepared. The anaconda at the bank margin does not give you extra time because you did not expect to encounter it here. The river simply is what it is, moving at the speed it moves, containing what it contains, operating according to the rules of its own ecology. And the question is always simply whether you understand those rules well enough to navigate within them. After Claudia was taken by boat to the clinic, Emilio returned to the platform. The research team was shaken, and the day's work was not resumed. But Emilio spent the afternoon doing something that the research team's field notes describe as unremarkable, but which was, in its own way, the completion of the morning's story. He repositioned the platform. He moved it 40 meters upstream along the bank, to a section where the current was slightly faster and the depth was greater, where the particular combination of conditions that favored piranha aggregation was less pronounced. He did this methodically, resetting the anchor points, checking the tether ropes, examining the new section of bank from the water before he brought the platform alongside it, looking into the water with the careful attention of someone who has been doing this for 50 years and has never stopped learning what he is looking at. The research team returned to work the following morning from the new position. The sample collection was completed without incident. The data from that morning, the data Claudia had been helping to collect when she fell, was eventually incorporated into a research paper on seasonal variation in aquatic invertebrate populations in low-water Amazon habitats. The paper has been cited 47 times. Claudia's name is on it, third in the author order. Emilio's name is in the acknowledgments. He does not regard this asymmetry as particularly significant. He does not work on the river for acknowledgement. He works on it because it is his life and his livelihood, and because he is, at 53, still learning things about it that he did not know before. He mentions this when asked about the rescue, not in the context of the rescue specifically, but in the context of why he continues to do this work at all. The river is not the same twice. Not the same season to season, not the same year to year, certainly not across the decades he has been working on it. The constancy is only apparent. Underneath it, everything is changing, and tracking those changes, understanding what they mean for the animals and the plants and the people who live beside the water, is a project without an endpoint. There are now 32,000 known species of fish in the world. Of those, approximately 8,000 live in freshwater, and of those, roughly 3,000 are endemic to the Amazon basin alone. 3,000 fish species in a single river system. The diversity is not just in fish. The Amazon basin contains an estimated 10% of all species on Earth across all taxonomic groups, in a region that represents less than 1% of the planet's surface. The concentration of life here is without parallel anywhere on Earth, and the mechanisms by which that life has diversified and speciated and filled ecological niches are still incompletely understood by the scientists who spend their careers studying them. The piranha diversified into its current species richness through a combination of geographical isolation, created by the complex drainage history of the Amazon basin as river channels separated and reconnected over geological time, and ecological opportunity, as the enormous diversity of food resources in the flood cycle created niches for fish with different dietary specializations. The seed-cracking tambaki and the flesh-cutting Pygocentris are both piranhas, occupying entirely different ecological roles, having diverged from common ancestors as the river system changed around them over millions of years. The Amazon made them both. The Amazon makes everything it contains. And the Amazon contains things we have not found yet. This is not hyperbole. The rate of new species discovery from this basin, even in the age of satellite imaging and genetic sequencing and unmanned aerial surveys, is not slowing. It is a large number each year. New fish, new plants, new insects, new fungi, new descriptions of things that have been living in the Amazon basin for millions of years and have only now come to the attention of the taxonomists, who will name them and place them in the formal structure of biological classification. Claudia went back into the water 6 weeks after the incident. She did this deliberately because she had thought carefully about what the alternative meant. Not going back meant that the 90 seconds in the river had defined her relationship with this place permanently, had reduced it from the complex and reciprocal thing she was working toward to a simple story of injury and fear. She did not want that. She waded into a section of bank that Emilio had assessed carefully beforehand, in a month when water levels had begun to rise and piranha aggregations had begun to disperse, with Emilio standing in the shallows beside her and with full knowledge of what the water contained. She stood in the water for a long time. The current moved around her ankles. Something brushed against her left leg, almost certainly a small characid navigating the current, and she registered the sensation without panic, which surprised her, and then did not surprise her, because she had been spending 6 weeks learning the river rather than fearing it, and that learning had changed something fundamental in the way she understood her position within it. She was not the top of the food chain. She was not the most powerful organism in this ecosystem. She was an animal, reasonably intelligent, with some useful tools and some hard-won knowledge, in an environment that was older than her species, by a margin so vast it defies easy comprehension. The Amazon had been doing what it does for tens of millions of years before the first humans appeared on the landscape. It will, if it survives the pressures currently being exerted upon it, continue doing what it does for tens of millions of years after we are gone. That is the ground truth of every survival story that comes out of this river. The river is not hostile. It is not kind. It is simply operating according to its own rules. And the people who understand those rules, the Emilios of the basin, the people born beside this water and shaped by it across a lifetime, are not somehow supernatural or exceptional in any way that is not available to everyone. They are simply people who have done the work of learning. Patient, cumulative, specific work. Work that begins before dawn on a slow boat and ends after dark and resumes the next morning, without the expectation that it will ever be finished. This is what survival actually looks like in places where survival requires more than basic common sense. It looks like knowledge accumulated across time, transmitted between generations, updated continuously as conditions change, and deployed without drama when it is needed. It looks like a man throwing a rope twice across moving water and not stopping when the first throw falls short. It looks like maintaining pressure on a bandage for 2 hours on a slow boat while talking about nothing in particular, because the talking matters too. It looks like going back into the water 6 weeks later, because the alternative is a smaller life. The scars on Claudia's leg are not a record of defeat. They are a record of information. Information about the dry season, about the concentration of fish in shrinking water, about the behavior of a platform under shifting weight, about what a piranha's teeth can accomplish in 90 seconds, about the value of a rope thrown accurately, about the difference between a response driven by knowledge and one driven by panic. All of that information, every bit of it, was purchased in approximately 90 seconds in brown Amazon water, with Piranha at her legs and a guide on the bank who knew exactly what to do and did it without wasting a single second on anything other than the problem directly in front of him. She is still in the Amazon. She is in her 4th year of research in this basin now, and she has taken to arriving at the field site before Emilio does each morning, not because she knows more than he does, she does not, but because she is trying to build the habit of observation that he has, the pre-dawn engagement with the river that allows you to read what it is doing today, rather than assuming it is doing what it did yesterday. She is learning the seasonal calendar not from a chart but from the water itself, from the color and the smell and the surface behavior and the sounds, from the birds and the insects and the way the light comes through the canopy at different times of year. She has a long way to go. She knows this. The river will teach her if she lets it, and she intends to let it, for as long as she is here. The piranha are still in the water. They were there before she arrived, and they will be there after she leaves. They are not waiting for her. They are not thinking about her. They are doing exactly what they have always done, what the river has shaped them over millions of years to do, in the shaded margins of the low-water bank, where organic matter accumulates and small fish concentrate, and the conditions for feeding are optimal. She knows where those places are now. She knows what months to be most careful. She knows what flashes at the surface mean, and what to do when she sees them, and when not to put a research cable in the water and lean her weight over the platform edge. She knows these things because a man named Emilio knew them first, and because he threw a rope twice and pulled steadily until she was out of the water, and because she had the intelligence and the honesty to understand